BofA has revised recently up Japan's GDP forecast. Izumi, good to have you with us. You're pretty upbeat. I mean, what's driving this optimism?
Well, I'm not sure I would call myself, extremely bullish on the outlook. I think what we're trying to say here is that, first of all, it's very clear that the economy bottomed in May, and that was when the worst of the coronavirus shock hit. Since then, we had a lull in the recovery around August because of a modest second wave in infections, but that's come down. And what we're noticing now is that there's been a pretty decent recovery in services spending, restaurants, travel and the like, which was the laggard in this recovery, thanks to some government stimulus programs. So the pickup in spending is broadening out a bit, and that bodes well for the consumption outlook.
Investors, though, have been pretty pessimistic in recent days, and the BOJ has said it will do more if needed. The question really is, how much more can the BOJ do? Isn't it close to being out of ammunition?
Yeah, I would agree with you that the Bank of Japan has already done a tremendous amount to support the economy, especially backstopping loans to troubled corporates who are suffering from the effects of restrictions on activity and services and the like. So it looks like, they're content to keep the current monetary policy settings unchanged. They're probably going to extend these financial support programs because they're still important, and we're still not out of the woods completely when it comes to this coronavirus recession, especially in the United States and Europe. But I don't think there's much more that the BOJ can independently do. And in the meantime, like many other countries, the focus instead is on what fiscal can do. There, Prime Minister Suga is talking about compiling another stimulus package, extending some of the support programs for employment and things like that. But I'm not sure we're going to get a bazooka on that front, particularly because Japan has managed the coronavirus situation quite well so far.
We heard from the BOJ that expressed concern about how the pandemic is putting a lot of pressure on the banking sector. What kind of risks do you see there?
Well, I think the risk now is that in the early stages of the coronavirus crisis, we had this sudden stop in cash flows. And so the concerns were a lot about corporate liquidity. But now, as the recession drags on, it's probably been about 7 to 8 months, and we turn into 2021, if the spending on sectors such as restaurants, airlines, that doesn't recover, then these liquidity risks are going to start into solvency risks, and corporates are going to start going bankrupt. I mean, they already have, but it's going to be a gradual creep higher, and that means, losses on lending. So I think for the banks, that's the danger. But again, fortunately, because the Bank of Japan has backstopped some of these loans, and banks have been increasing their capital buffers to adjust for this, I don't think it's going to be, a very disruptive systemic risk.
Izumi, I mean, we saw this retail sales number earlier. It's showing a bit of a stall taking place in terms of spending on the Japanese high street, as it were, or Main Street. Now, what about that? Does that worry you at all, is one part of my question. The second is, a lot of these companies have been able to get through what's been happening because they've had a lot of cash on their balance sheets, but it's only time before they start to feel it.
Yeah, I think, well, in terms of the September data, it is quite backward looking. And the good news is that when we look at the super high frequency indicators, it does look like momentum picked up again in October. But yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of uncertainties. And I think if we were to discuss whether the risks to the outlook are skewed to the upside or downside, it's probably to the downside. Of course, the one concern that I think is on the minds of both business owners and the government is that we're heading into the winter season. And Japan has, again, so far managed the coronavirus situation pretty well. But the risk of a third wave is always around the corner. And I think the concern is that because of that uncertainty, spending and general economic activity levels are not quite going to be able to recover to 100%. It's going to take some time until business owners gain the confidence that things are normalizing. So I do think those risks, around cash flows are still there. there. And that's why the government and BOJ absolutely must continue to support the economy at this time.
Izumi, also just having Yoshihide Suga speaking in Parliament at the moment, talking about major countries, cooperation is needed to avoid debt problems. This is some of the things he's saying, going on to say things about essentially the need to be vigilant, and that they're going to be monitoring the situation in the budget, and they would take measures, take steps, should I say, to help struggling people. Okay, that's one side of it. But you know, with what Japan's been through and what so many other countries have been through, it sort of accelerated what were trends before. Do you think that after all this is said and done and coronavirus is behind us, which hopefully it is one day, that we might have a slightly different engine of growth in Japan, which might avoid some of the problems that we've been seeing with its economy for so many years?
Yes, I think one very promising long-term engine of growth is digitalization. I mean, I think the coronavirus crisis really put it, highlighted how far Japan is lagging behind in areas of digitalization. There's a lot of policy, strength and focus on increasing the budget for digitalization, starting with government services, but on down to the private sector. So I think that always the concern is, what do we do with the CapEx outlook now that the Olympics-related construction boom is over? We're missing that engine, and I think what could replace that that investment engine are these investments around digitalization and upgrading of Japan's infrastructure.
Izumi, investors are looking for shelter. They're looking at the yen, which is at a one-month high. At what point will a strong yen worry the BOJ?
Well, I think at these levels, like 104.5, I don't think the Bank of Japan is, particularly concerned. It's not like they can do a lot about the situation, but I think if we start, breaking below 104 and the risk of the dollar yen falling to say 100 increases, then I think both the BOJ and government will be on guard. And I think you will get a lot of, verbal intervention, for example, and possibly some, rebalancing of flows. So we're forecasting dollar yen to end the year at 103. So we're not quite there yet. But I think anything, below that starts concerning policymakers.